Hey everyone, on the Mind Rise podcast today we have Noelle Stary. She is an absolute powerhouse, and we're going to be talking about what it actually takes to start your own business. And we'll be going not only through some of the detailed how-tos, but mostly the mindset, right? We have to have our head in the right space, and that just doesn't happen overnight. So Noelle's going to be giving us a behind-the-scenes perspective on not only how she founded her very successful marketing company known as 20 Lemons, as well as her co-working spaces and the licensing model that goes along with that, but also her book, Main Street Moxie. So Noelle is an absolute powerhouse. You have a lot to learn for today, especially the power of positivity, perspective, and learning how to own your power. Can't wait for you guys to check out the episode. And if you haven't already, definitely give us a review. Check us out on Spotify, Apple, Google Play, and YouTube to watch all the action in place. You know, Noelle, I don't know about you, but my number one value is waking up in the morning and being stoked about how I'm going to spend my day. That's really important to me. Mm-hmm. So that's it's an interesting perspective of okay, the business is just set up to make the money and get a hobby if you want to be entertained. But I want a hobby and I want to love the way that I'm spending my time.
You want to love your work.
Yeah.
I didn't start a business to not love my work.
Right.
I started a business because I'm I love this stuff. I want to do the stuff I love, Right. So how do I work around it?
Right. And what do they say? Do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life.
Yeah.
Zone of Genius from Gay Hendricks, The Big Leap, how he talks about if you're operating in your zone of genius, you do it all day, every day, you would do it for free and you wake up jazzed to do it the next day.
Yeah.
So I think about those things and the way that I choose to spend my time. And maybe I'm doing it completely wrong. I don't know. And what's the metric of right or wrong? Is it exactly the bank account, or is it that intrinsic feeling of living your purpose?
I think as with anything else, it's when you kind of start going, you're veering off the road a little, you feel it. So whether it's in your business or personal or I think the bigger thing is, and I talk about it in marketing all the time, is what you're doing authentic to you. You can say, hey, look at all this social media. Look at all these really awesome grids. I want the same thing. But if you're I don't want to be in front of a camera, tell my story, talk about my stuff, highlight my clients, then you're kind of this is probably not the platform for you.
Right. Is what you're doing authentic to you. That's a writer downer for sure. Because everyone wants to be living their purpose. What's my purpose? What am I supposed to be doing? And it could be work. We could be talking work because that's what we're talking about today is work and following our passion, finding our career path, and what it takes to get there. But I think that word authenticity, it needs to emanate not only in what you do and how you show up professionally, but also personally. I don't want to be in relationships or friendships that aren't laden with authenticity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do think that's true. I think it's the more you know yourself and what you like, the more that you want that type of stuff around you.
Absolutely. Well, it's one of the reasons that I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today, because you and I have known each other for a while. And I met you successful, right? For all intents and purposes, when I met you, you had founded the first female founder of a co-working space, and you had your marketing company, and you were taking guitar lessons at the time, and you were traveling, you were doing all of these things. And I met you at the star-eyed emoji and hi, oh my gosh, you're a complete and total rock star. And, in more intimate, getting to know you, more intimate conversations you and I have had, you didn't wake up like that. Yeah. More or less you invented yourself, the life that you have, the success that you have. No one handed it to you and was Noelle, here's what your life's going to be. And this is on the silver platter, right?
Yeah. I'm like laughing as you're saying this because I remember years ago, I remember working at a company and I remember someone looking at me one day and they're like, you kind of look like a little Spanish senorita today. And I said, that was the look I was going for. I said, I lay in my bed in the morning and I think, what do I want to look like today? And I come up with my outfit and voila, this is what you've got. And I mean, even just recently in COVID, I'm sitting around and I know that this is I don't know if this is what we all do. This is what I do. I'm sitting around and I'm hanging out in the house and I'm thinking to myself like, well, by the time COVID's done, I can clearly speak French. So I started taking French classes, but it's a little bit of like what you're saying. It's like, you start thinking about, hey, I want to have a company. I want to be a part of a community. How do I do this? How do I position myself? Who's the type of person that I want to be? And, I even think a little bit about when people used to ask me all the time, what was it like to start a business? And I used to say, it's a character building experience. That was my answer. Well, I think starting a business is a character building experience because what you continuously learn is you've got so much more. You need to grow into the type of person you want to be to best run your business.
Right. And while if that was a question on an exam, right, the long form questions, like you got that right. And like, what were the WTFs? Like, what brought you to starting your own business? Because I think for all intents and purposes, culturally, what is told to us, and I don't know about you, but what's told to us is, okay, you do well in high school, you go to a good college, you do well in college, and then you get that job, right? You fulfill that role, you climb that corporate ladder, and then you get a gold watch and a retirement party and a big sheet cake, and you have made it. Bum, 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 you retired, right? Like, yeah. I don't know about you, but that was the story that I was always told, whether it was by my parents or by the teachers around me, guidance counselors, like, here's the plan, kid, right? Yes. You do well, you follow this path, you get that job. So yep. I'm so curious for you, like, what was that path? And do you think it was supposed to be one way, but then, hey, kind of turned out to be the other way?
Yeah.
And what gave you courage to do that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I went to University of Maryland, College Park, and I got my degree in human resources with the intent of, in my world, I was like, I'm going to be a corporate lawyer working on mergers and acquisitions. Like, this is where I saw my future going. And Maryland's business school was a huge advocate of get out of school, work a few years, go back for your MBA. And when I got out, I ended up working with an entrepreneur, with like a local restaurant entrepreneur who had several he went from one location to several locations by the time I was working with him. And I will never forget, he was like in his 30s. And I remember saying to him, I am so impressed. You made it to your 30s working in business and you get to wear jeans every day. Like, he never wore a suit. He always wore jeans.
Right.
And in my mind, that was like, you made it, because I felt like, oh, you were kind of back to what you said. You were always told, this is the path you're going to take. This is how you're going to dress. This is how you're going to present yourself. And what really ended up happening when I worked with this company is I started seeing how dynamic an entrepreneur could be. And I started seeing how dynamic they got to make decisions and choices on every little thing that was happening. And I really liked the speed of business. I think like that was probably the thing that got me more interested than anything else was. And when you made a decision and you did something, you could see the fruits of your labor like immediately, you
Right.
know, and this
Right.
is not a knock on corporate. It's not, but it became something where, you know, as women, the people who tell us how to buy stuff, tell us that we like tactical things and we like to touch them and look at them and see them. And something that I just really felt like was I liked seeing like the outcome of the different types of stuff that I was working on. And so as I was working for a few years, I wanted, you know, the economy started kind of falling apart around us. And I started to think to myself, wait a minute, if I'm going to put all my eggs in somebody else's basket, I better have enough trust in myself to put my eggs in my own basket. And I remember listening to like an old econ teacher who used to talk about like, you know, I started my business 2008, 2009. And it was around the time that someone would say to me, hey, the whole world could be falling around you, but you can be wildly successful in your own micro ecosystem. And so that just was always like the little bird in my ear that just said, you don't need everything to be successful. You just need to be successful in your world. And so I think that became like a major driver.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that perspective, because I think you're right. I think that we often allow our head to be influenced by this is crashing and COVID's shut down everything, which I'm not saying that many of us didn't have to make some pivots. I mean, I know you personally had some COVID pivots that you had to make. And if I bought into the sky is falling rhetoric, like, hold on, batten down the hatches, buy as much freaking toilet paper as you possibly can, like the world is coming to an end, how efficiently would I show up in my work? How real would I be in what I want to do? I mean, frankly, as a coach and a psychotherapist, like I'd probably suck at my job, because I would be in that constant fight or flight freeze zone of the world is coming crashing to an end. So I hear what you're saying. Like it has to be within your own microcosm. Like, yeah, that's very powerful.
I'm sure you've all heard the saying, nothing changes if nothing changes. And that's true. It's really hard to make change in our life without taking the time to actually look at the way that we're showing up in the world and the thoughts that we have that really dictate the way that we show up in the world. That is why we created the 90-day Elevate Journal. You're definitely going to want to grab this, and it's available now on Amazon. The 90-day Elevate Journal is essentially designed for you to take a deep dive into what it really means to rise, transform, and lead. Grab your copy for less than $20. You can always visit www.themindrise.com/elevate or check it out in the show notes. But you need to grab your copy of the 90-day journal now and really elevate to the next level.
And I think, you know, believe it or not, I think my mom at an early age understood. And I think mothers know this about their children. They're like, you are not like everybody else. You are special, and you are special in your own somewhat weird way. And it was, I think I had a little bit, I think it was a little bit of like a twofold piece, because I think I listened to a lot of what society said, and I felt like frustrated. How come I don't just fit in the box?
Yeah.
I'm trying to fit in these boxes. And my mom was really the one that was a little bit of an advocate that was like, your box doesn't have to look like everybody else's box. It could look different. You could create it. It could, and I did struggle. I struggled with it. Like, I think from a personal standpoint. But it's like there's a little bit of an oyster in it too, because as you're saying, I don't know what my box is like. You kind of start turning around and you're creating all these other things, and you're kind of creating this little castle of your own, and you're like, wait a minute, like I'm pretty good in my world if I just kind of like stick into the world that I now know,
Right. Yeah. I mean, what a permission slip though, Noelle. Like what a permission slip that whether or not your younger self knew that you needed was that your mother gave you.
Yeah.
Because as you were saying it, like, why don't I fit? I mean, I distinctly remember plenty of occasions of feeling that way. And just feeling like everybody's drawing their picture and their tree has green and the trunk is brown and like mine's purple and orange and I'm like and I've got some birds in there and I've now
You're like, mine looks like Dr. Seuss.
Right, mine looks like Dr. Seuss. Yeah. And I remember being young and so proud of this tree that like, and instead of like sprouting apples, like there it is, sprouting ice cream Sundays, because wouldn't that be fantastic if you were like 6 or 7 years old? And just looking around, like everyone's got theirs hung up and then there's mine. And it wasn't until like I see it in contrast to others, I was like, oh, and it's easy as a kid to have that right, wrong, black or white narrative of like, oh, I did it wrong. So what a gift in many ways that your mom gave you to like write that permission slip of like, oh yeah, by the way, yours doesn't have to look like everybody else's.
Yeah. And I used to get mad at her. I'm like, but I want to make it work.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I feel like as I've gotten older and I've done more stuff in business, like I think we become so strong at where our strengths lie, that we don't even recognize them as strengths anymore. Right. And so these things where sometimes we say, hey, I've got to fit into a box, or I'm trying to get alongside everyone else. And maybe we're still doing our stuff. We don't realize, but I'm really good at X. And you just assume everybody else is good at it too, Right. And so I think there's like this little bit of this like moment too, where, and when you're really good at something and then other people aren't, you're still not in the same box as them. Like now you've created like another like discrepancy. But you have your whole book, Own Your Power. And it's like, when you finally realize, wait a minute, hello people, I made the tree that makes the ice cream sundaes. Like, when you realize you've created something that's like special and unique, then all of a sudden now it's like, but you really have a gift that you're now bringing to people.
Sure.
And so it's like, if you don't give yourself the opportunity, or I don't know if it's an opportunity driven thing. I don't know if it's a self-directed thing that just happens. It's kind of interesting. I think, like, as you mentioned, like I opened a co-working space 12 years ago. We were one of the first co-working spaces in the state. And people would say, why are you doing this? And you're like, I have to,
Right. I can't imagine doing anything else. So of course
it doesn't always make sense, but like somewhere in your head, you're like, it's like your tree with the ice cream. Like, hello, it's a tree with ice cream. Like, and so even
the greatest idea ever.
As you're saying it, I'm like, you know what? Why is all of our trees fruit? Like, as you're saying this is what I'm thinking in my head. So, but it's this thing where, you start playing and your own personality starts becoming a driver. Right. And then you like turn around and you're like, I'm not doing what maybe everybody's doing, but like I'm bringing something kind of unique to the table.
Right. Well, speaking of books, you also released a book during COVID, right? So here you are like learning French, and which you are still actively learning French.
Yeah.
But you released a book during COVID, Main Street Moxie.
Yes.
And would you mind talking to us about that concept of going from just surviving to thriving, and even like maybe how COVID has influenced that, or even what that means post-COVID?
Yeah. So I really kind of think like when COVID hit, I, as much as the rest of the world, just got slammed. And I think that it's a little bit like whenever I've been stressed, whenever I've had major stressors in my life, I feel like there's an opportunity to like, let's go back to basics first, you know,
Okay.
like, so instead of kind of like spinning out and getting concerned about all these other things that are happening, it's like, am I sleeping? Am I eating right? Am I really giving myself the self-care that I need? Because if you don't have the right mental state to where you need to be, how do you really progress forward? And I mean, even in there, I think I have like some tips and tricks. And one of my favorite statement is like, are you wearing your favorite underwear? Like, because it starts from the bottom up. Like, if you're like, I mean, what was the big joke, right? What were the biggest jokes in COVID? No pants. Pants have gone out the window. We no longer need pants. We no longer need bras. But like, there's something to be said about when your undercarriage is feeling supported. And so, I mean, I say it a little tongue in cheek, but not entirely, because I do think it's, hey, how do we stop? How do we go back to our basics? If we go back to our basics, don't we realize that our foundations are strong, and maybe we don't need to fully knock everything down and pivot. We just need to look at where we're at and tweak things or shift things slightly, right. You know, and I think it comes a little bit with the concept. And I think if you've been in business long enough, like nothing is an overnight success, is years in making, right? And so I think it's a little bit like when you're in a moment of stress, like how do you slow down enough and look at things and go back to your basics? And instead of like running away or making major changes, how do you make the shifts that you need so that you get that extra 20% or 30% of what you need?
Right. I had a friend who actually sent me a GIF the other day, and it said, "What's the difference between ordinary and extraordinary?" And like the GIF was like, it's just that little bit.
Yeah.
It's just a little bit. And as you're talking, I think to myself, you're right. It is about going back to those basics. Maybe, and I mean, everyone's experience in many parts was different, and many of us had very similar experiences, right? It could be different and similar all at the same time.
Yep.
I love me a good paradigm. And I think that one of the things that's important for us to remember is that we don't necessarily have to completely change everything. If we go back to our foundation, and I even love what you're saying about like, are you wearing your favorite underwear? Right? Like the foundation of everything that we do. Right? Are you sacrificing? Are you compromising? Is it good enough? Right? Is a job good enough? Good enough? Is the relationship, oh, it's good enough. Oh, my health, it's good enough. Oh, you know, my friendship is good enough. And are you settling?
Yeah.
Because I think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And this is me putting my psychology hat on. But in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the base of it is food, water, shelter. Right. And as we go up from there, it's social connection and societal impact and purpose, you know, all the way to place, you know, the pinnacle is self-actualization. Well, we could all say that we want to know our purpose or we want to make a big impact, but it's really hard to do that when we don't have that solid foundation of the way we treat ourselves.
So think about it like this. In COVID, what was the number one thing people hoarded? Toilet paper and food.
Right.
Like they were like, oh, let me go get my 7 self-help books while I'm hanging. I mean, believe it or not, online book sales were like through the roof. Right. But I mean, really, ultimately, innately, everyone went back to, I need my toilet paper and my food, right? And so I do think that there's definitely some correlation between how do I get there? How do I make some of these steps? And when you're really feeling funky and out of it, I think sometimes I'm a big fan of slow down to speed up.
Mm.
Yeah. Because I've tried the other way.
Right. The push through, the effort, the like go till we're exhausted, lay down and lie.
And I don't know if that comes with age. I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, I am just too tired to push, and it's because I think that you also recognize there's smarter ways to do things.
Right.
And so you're like, wait a minute, I've done this before. I know this game. I know how to like make these adjustments. And so part of the self-actualization is how do I get to really know what are my triggers, or how do I know how to manage myself in these moments to make better decisions?
Right. It's that question of like, do I know myself well? Right? Do I know myself well? Do I treat myself well? Because as you're saying, maybe it's age, maybe it's also experience. I mean, age brings with it experience. And even this morning, I was driving to yoga and thinking to myself, I've done this, I've done that, I've done this in my lifetime, right? I've sat on the boards, I've created a company from scratch. I've been super successful in my career. I've, put blah, blah, blah in my bank account. I've had these friendships. I've had these dinner parties. I've hosted these events around the world. Like I've written the book, I've written the next book. Like I've checked a lot of the boxes. And there were times when I certainly was doing those things because my narrative was, well, that's the definition of success, or that's the definition of fulfillment, or when I do that, then I'll be happy. Like plenty of those experiences. And as I'm driving in like my 39th go around the sun, I'm thinking to myself, I've done a lot of these things and I'm so happy where I am right now. Where I am right now feels like not a plateau in the negative sense. Everyone talks about plateau in a negative connotation, but it almost feels like I'm at a bus stop and I'm choosing to stay at the bus stop. The buses are driving by and they're like, this opportunity for growth, or this opportunity to 10x your business, or this opportunity and I'm just kind of like, I'm good right now being where I am. And I wonder, does it come from age? Does it come from experience? Does it come from not feeling like you have to strive and hustle in order to have a sense of self and identity? What's your take on it?
No, I think about this. I think about this often in the sense of, to your point before, it seemed like, hey, I'm checking boxes, right? I did this, I set this up, I checked my box, I saved for X. And when I go to make decisions now, I think to myself a little bit, why do I want this? Is it an ego? Is this an ego thing? Like and you know what? If it is just strictly ego, then you say, I just want to do it to stroke my own ego.
And that's okay too.
That's okay. I think part of what I think part of what makes a good business person is someone that also understands, it's funny, like, as I'm like listening to myself, I'm like, oh my God, I spend my whole life putting myself in and out of boxes, right? Like, oh, this is the box. I'm coloring the box. I want a different box. I'm making a new box. I set up my business and I'm like, wait, if I put a little more structure in place and I stay in these boxes, it works better. And then you're like, I don't like these boxes. I need to make new things, right? But I think it's a little bit of this idea of there's an ebb and flow to understanding your boundaries. And as we change as people, our ideas of our boundaries change.
Right.
But it's our acknowledgement, right? It's not just that the world is happening to us. It's that we're either setting up boundaries around us so that we can operate better in our own world.
Yes.
Or we better know how to understand and absorb things that are happening in our world around us. Right?
5,000%. Absolutely.
But like, it takes a long time to get there and to stay there.
Oh, right. And stay there to feel like a death grip of like, oh, I have this understanding. Please, let me just stay in this. But even as you said before, like right now, the age stage, whether that's determined on career or it's determined on personal life, whatever, that I'm at. And if I'm doing something, I'm like, why am I doing this? Am I doing this just for ego? Yeah, I'm just doing it for ego. My 20-something-year-old self did not know the difference.
No.
Right. It didn't know the difference. The 20-year-old self didn't have enough like experiences under my belt. And I also think that in many ways, that's like freshman year of life, right? Those 20s when you're just striving and hustling and proving that you deserve to have a voice or a seat at the table or have value or expertise. And at some point, a transition happens. I think it happens gradually where you have arrived. You are an expert. And whether that's because you can command X dollars for whatever project that you're doing or, service that you're offering, or, people are leaning into you for your expertise or the title that you have. But I think that regardless of what the byline on your email says, that what we have to acknowledge is like my worthiness, my deserving, my identity doesn't come from how hard I can hustle. But to your point before, like, what have I learned and what am I like, how am I approaching the situations? Like I've been here before.
Yeah. And I mean, and I think it's even like, I joke about, hey, we lay in bed and think about what do I want to look like? Like, what's my identity look like today? What do I look like? What do I think about? What's my brand? How am I standing out there? And I think, one of my colleagues says to me all the time, like, you better be like, you're always in a state of like evolving yourself and almost like rebranding yourself, like to think, hey, this is who I am today, and therefore that's who I'm going to be in 20 years doesn't work, right? Like,
no,
constantly changing. And in business, our businesses are changing because we are in our character building experience of being the business owner, where we are growing and we're bringing different things to the table. And so I think it's getting comfortable in that state of uncomfortableness where you're like, like the great books of What Got You Here Won't Get You There, it's right. Like, I mean, that book's 20 years old, maybe. Like, I mean, the concept isn't new, but reading the book, and actually, if I read the book 20 years ago, I didn't understand it the way I would understand it today.
1,000%. 1,000%. I could give my 20-year-old self the books that are so impactful to me right now at 39. And my 20-year-old self is not ready for that read.
Yeah.
And we could all say, oh, I wish I knew then what I knew now. But we only know what we know now because of the experiences that we have had. And I think full circle, as we wrap up, like, I think, Noelle, it does go back to like, you invented yourself.
Yeah.
And how freaking powerful, how empowering is that to know that I am constantly evolving and I am inventing myself. Tonight I have tennis practice. I am a terrible tennis player. It's like, you
just started tennis. I think I just heard this.
I know I just started, but I always joke, like they watch me and I have an athletic build. So I look like a person that should be good at tennis, but my brain body connection is not
there.
Is not there. And I joke that I'm like, I play tennis like a soccer player because I do. But the thing is that this goes again with that place of inventing yourself. Like if you wanted to be a business owner and an entrepreneur, well, that's just what you're going to be. Right?
Yeah.
Go ahead and go do that thing. If you want to be a tennis player, which is purely like, I am so like, it's not even ego. I think it's just entertainment. I'm really excited for the outfit, and I made a deal with myself that if I could get decent at tennis, I'm going to get like some little outfits.
They are really
ridiculous. But I love like at this stage of the game, like why the hell not be ridiculous?
But it's so funny. Like a colleague of mine says to me all the time, like if she heard you talking right now, she'd be like, Bailey, you are a tennis player. it's not like when you become like you
Right.
are going, you're practicing, you are
Right.
it, right?
Right.
And so I think like, you know, it's that whole imposter syndrome. We're so busy trying to become something,
Sure.
but it's the moment that we start it, we are not good yet, but we are a tennis player, right?
Right. Because we are inventing ourselves. Each step, each choice that we make, each interaction that we have with people, like even the interaction that you have at the grocery store with somebody, all these things are inventing and as you, to your point, building our character and who we are and how we're showing up in this like one precious life.
Yeah.
I know.
I love it.
Oh, Noelle, I love it. I love it. I could talk to you forever. All right. So as we wrap up, my dear, people are looking for you on the World Wide Web. Where are they finding you? I know we're going to put all that stuff in the show notes, but just tell them about Noelle of 20 Lemons.
All right. So we got a few spots where you can find me. You can find our marketing company on 20lemons.com, 20lemons.com, like the yellow fruit. Main Street Moxie, the Main Street Moxie book.com is where we can find about Main Street Moxie. And if you are ever looking for a place to drop in and work for the day, just check out the co-working space. And we have locations in Central Jersey.
Awesome. We'll throw all of those links in there of all the things that Noelle's doing as she's inventing herself in the world as you are and as I am as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.